Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Behind the Stripes webcast. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Walljasper along with Tribune football beat writer Dave Matter. Dave, bowl practices carry on. One of the big things about bowl practices, I guess, depending on how you want to approach it, is you can give younger guys a lot of run there, or you can mainly focus on the team you're going to play. Sounds like Missouri's maybe changing their approach a little bit this year, but they have given Corbin Berkstresser, the backup, or the number 3 quarterback, a little extra chance to play with the first-line groups. Just your thoughts on the quarterback situations going into the offseason. You think he's a guy that can challenge James Franklin, or do you think James is really entrenched now as the guy?
Well, I think if you look what James did this season, you consider who he did it against. They played a pretty good schedule. Not a lot of great defenses in the Big 12, but his numbers are pretty good, and they're better than Blaine Gabbert's in a lot of categories from last year, and that's as a first-year starter. So I would be surprised if anyone can really push him for the starting job. But the other day, offensive coordinator David Yost, in talking to me about Corbin Berkstresser, actually used the phrase, they want to see Corbin put some pressure on James. And I think more than anything he meant by that just, making him feel some heat behind him, maybe playing well enough to where James feels like he has to play better in practice. Because he didn't get that last year. I mean, he was the guy by default more than anything because they didn't have anybody else who was close to his level during, not so much during spring, but after Tyler Gabbert left. It was really James, and you had some walk-ons. You had Jimmy Costello, who came back, who was never really a threat to win the job. But if Berkstresser continues to progress, and he's looked okay during these bowl practices, he's in much better shape than he was in the summer, then maybe you can get to the point where he can play well enough that James is looking over his shoulder a little bit and feels like he has to play better. Also,
James is the guy that runs the ball a ton, so there's always a potential for injury. With Berkstresser, I think they've also proved in the past that if they like a quarterback, they will play him a little bit. They'll get him a series or two. The other side of the coin is, depending on whether Maddison Mock comes in at the semester or
right
when the August rolls around, is he a guy you think that can inject himself into?
Well, they seem to really like him, and he's a guy that gets that Chase Daniel tag a lot because he's physically very similar to Chase, put up similar kind of numbers in high school out in Ohio. He hasn't quite decided yet, as far as we know, if he's going to come in at the semester. He's coming in for his official visit this coming weekend. So I would assume that conversation will take place and a decision will take place if he's going to come in at the semester break. If he does, I think you throw him right in the mix there with Berkstresser as a guy that can at least put a little heat on Franklin. But, going into the SEC next year, going up against those SEC defenses, I think you'll feel better about a guy who knows the system, has played pretty well like Franklin did this year. He proved his toughness this year, I think. He'll get the benefit of the doubt, but he still has to play better than the other guys in practice to keep that job.
All right. Look at some of the injured players, the guys who are missing with serious injuries. I know you talked to Rex Sharp today for a story you're going to do for the paper. Specifically, Elvis Fisher, Henry Josey, maybe. What's their prognosis going forward?
They feel like Elvis Fisher is way ahead of schedule. He's basically 4 months out of surgery for the patellar tendon injury that he suffered. And they're really pleased with how far he is. He's already lifting weights with that leg and doing some leg presses. He's doing agility drills. He took a couple pass sets the other day where he's basically simulating what he does as a pass blocker, and really that's how he hurt the knee, just on a routine pass set drill. So they're really impressed with how hard he's worked and how quickly he's been back and rehabbing this thing. The thing with him that nobody knows yet is what the NCAA is going to decide, whether they're going to grant him that 6th year of eligibility. And also, Elvis hasn't quite decided yet if he wants to come back for a 6th year. He's played a lot of football at Missouri. I think when you're a senior, you kind of get mentally prepared for this to be your last go-around, and he's going to have to hit the reset button if he decides to come back or not, if he's granted that extra year. So still a lot of stuff up in the air, but physically, he seems to be well ahead of the pace to be back and able to play next year. Henry Josey's a different situation. He's only a month out of his knee injury, and that knee injury, the more you talk to people around the program, it's really unprecedented, the damage he did to his left knee. That they can't find anyone in football, in college football, that they can look up and do research on who's suffered as much damage to that knee as he did. I mean, he blew out everything you could possibly blow out. Willis McGahee, the former Miami running back who's been in the NFL for a long time, he's the closest they can find, and he's able to come back and play eventually. So he's got a long road ahead of him. I think in January they expect him to maybe get off his crutches. He can start putting his foot on the ground, and they'll start bending that knee a little bit. but he still needs ACL surgery, and that won't happen until at least February. So they don't want to publicly put out any kind of time frame at this point, but I think he'd be a real long shot to play next season, just considering he still needs another surgery.
And he is a guy that does have he did not use his redshirt year as a freshman, so he could sit out with having no worries about not getting his full 4 years.
Yeah.
But it's going to be, I think, a long haul just to be the running back he was, or something close to it.
Yeah, and that's a question they're not even close to really addressing, because he's just got so much ahead of him as far as the rehab goes, and just kind of mentally getting through all the grind of what he's going to face here over the next year or so.
All right. Over the weekend, Missouri had a lot of recruits in. They got 2 commitments. Just your assessment on how things are going in recruiting, and if there is a cause for concern. Because I know last year it was a small recruiting class in numbers, and I think really an impact, so far at least, it certainly has been small. No actual true freshmen played, which has become a real rarity at Missouri. They've shown a willingness to play true freshmen.
Well, the last couple of years, Missouri's also wrapped up its recruiting almost around this time. And now it's a little bit different situation. I think they basically have 15 verbal commitments right now, give or take a few. Some of those are softer than others at this point. And a lot of the kids that came and visited last weekend were guys that had already committed, so they weren't expecting necessarily to get a bunch more out of the process. But they know that they're facing kind of a transition, that a lot of these kids that they either committed or got commitments from or recruiting back a few months ago now have a different situation they're facing with Missouri changing conferences. Evan Bame's still the big one, the lineman from the Kansas City area. He was in town last week on his visit. It seems like he's probably going to recommit to Missouri eventually here. If you just kind of read between the lines and read some of the tweets that were coming out while he was in town with being hosted by some Missouri players. And he'll be a big get. He looks like a guy that could play on their offensive line right away, and you need those big, strong, physical guys in the SEC. And they also had a couple guys that, are pretty, their list of schools are pretty impressive, that were in on their official visits last week. They had a defensive end from San Antonio named Javonte McGee. He's a kid with an offer from every elite school in the country, Texas, Oregon, LSU, you name it. And then another running back / linebacker / safety from South Bend, Indiana, actually, who was committed to Notre Dame. They got him to take a visit. His name's David Perkins, and he's also going to look at LSU and Oregon, Tennessee, Ohio State, I believe. So they're bringing in some kids that are pretty impressive profiles. It's just a matter of, are they going to get them to join this class or not? So I think this class is still pretty much up in the air.
And obviously Dorial Green Beckham is the biggest fish of all. He has, I think, included Missouri in his final 5, but do you hear much about where his interests ultimately would land?
He and the family have been very vague on this whole process. They don't even like publicizing when he's going to take official visits. Part of it is the fact that he plays for their basketball team, so his schedule is kind of complicated anyway. He's actually in New York right now for an awards ceremony. Missouri is in the mix, and I think the thought is he'll probably visit late January, right before signing day. So, if he hasn't committed anywhere by then, and it doesn't seem like he's going to commit anywhere, this is going to go down to the last moment possibly. But as long as they're still in the mix, as long as he's still at least planning a visit, I guess that's positive at this point. But they're going up against some good programs for him: Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas. He's already visited, and Alabama also. So. Whoever gets him is going to get a guy that could probably start at receiver as a freshman, but I don't know. I don't want to say it seems unlikely he comes to Missouri, but you don't hear a lot of Missouri being in the lead necessarily for him.
All right. Well, join us again next week when we'll take a little closer look at Missouri's upcoming Independence Bowl game against North Carolina.